Good evening, guys. I hope you had a great weekend. This is week number 6. Last week, we had a synchronous meeting, and I want to start from that. I have my notes right here. We visited, and it was nice. I'm always interested in knowing, getting some feedback in general. What I want to highlight for sure or underline for sure is that we talked about your PDO that is coming up, and this is an individual project, all right? And I'm expecting you to send me at least 2 PDFs according to the syllabus and according to all the guidelines that we've talked about and I've shared. So please figure out the topic, find that original research article, peer-reviewed article, send it over, at least two. So I have a couple of options, and I will tell you which one to work on, and then you can start working on it. Okay. Now this is the time for you to identify what you're interested in, and then look into the literature and find a couple of PDFs. I don't want you to send me the titles. I want you to find the actual PDFs. That's important, right? Because if you can't find it, then you have to request it from the library and so on and so forth. So I want to make sure you have the PDF. So once I say this is the one, you can start right away. Okay? So don't forget about that. Tomorrow, office hours from 8 to 12:30, if you want to talk about that or anything else. Now, some feedback. A lot of hellos, a lot of feedback. Let's see. Hello 13, and I have my notes here so I can go over everything and don't miss anything. So hello 13, 73%. Okay. One question I want to go over is about the connection point between the planning and initiating of the CNS. Is it the motor cortex or our spinal cord? Okay, so the spinal cord is the connection point between the planning and initiating of the CNS and the execution and monitoring functions of the PNS and the neuromuscular system. LO14. 1 point higher, the average 74%. That was, I don't know why you missed that one, or most of you missed that one. It was about the behavior of the motor units, if they are slightly adaptable to training and practice. I thought I made clear that they're highly adaptable. So that was not a correct statement. So the behavior of motor units are highly adaptable to training and practice and forms the basis of any training-induced changes. And that's why we're focusing so much on training, right? LO15, 1 point higher, 75%. So here I want to talk about 4 items actually. So one item had to do with the somatosensory receptors. So not all somatosensory receptors directly cause reflex actions, right? Although all directly or indirectly influence muscle activity, not all somatosensory receptors directly cause reflex actions. That's one. The second one was about recognizing that internal and environmental circumstances and situational needs may lead to very different reflex responses and not very similar. Okay, so they're very different, and that has to do with the individual differences, and that goes on to say that we need to customize training because people react differently. The third item of the same LO, the focal vision goes to higher centers. Ambient information is routed to brain areas involved in initiating movement and to a lesser extent planning. Okay, focal goes is sent back to higher brain centers involved in planning of the movement. And the last one, which was a tricky one, and I don't know why the majority of you missed it. It said the GTO is considered the most important proprioceptor due to the strong reflex action it produces, its relatively high sensitivity to stimuli, its ability to respond to both muscle stretch and contraction, and its ability to be controlled by the CNS. Is it the GTO or the muscle spindle? So everything was correct, but it wasn't the GTO. That's the muscle spindle. Okay. In LO16, it wasn't 1 point higher. It was actually 7 points higher than the last one. The average score is 82%. Okay, so that was about the feedback that I had to give you. It's about some individual specific items. If you have any questions at all, email me. There are some of you that email me, and of course, I'll give you as much information as I can via email. Again, tomorrow office hours if you want to talk about anything, all right? From 8 to 12:30. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share our Moodle site. So we are exactly here. Okay, so I'm covering tonight. It's gonna be challenging for both of us, but we'll do fine, okay? We'll do very well. Chapter 6, 7, 8, 9. So you have for Sunday, LO 17, 18, 19, and 20. Okay, your PDO is right here. So you're presenting right here. So that's why I'm telling you March 28th is a deadline. That's why I'm telling you this is the time for you to send me what you would like to present. You don't have a ton of time. Okay, this is the week to do that. This is a week for me to reply to, and you can start working on it. Okay? All right. Tomorrow again, if you have any questions about that or anything, come to office hours. All right? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this and start with one of our chapters, which is chapter 6. Let me bring it up. Okay. Now we go here. All right. Turn this on. Next my screen. All right. Motor skills versus motor abilities. So movements can be categorized in many, many ways. As you can see, big, small, fast, slow, whole body, some parts of the body, and so on and so forth. In order to study, understand motor skills, it is very efficient if we kind of categorize it, right? Classify it. So classification, as you can see, named is monitoring, progressing, prescribing, and researching. Okay, it helps us with everything. All right, so let's start with this. 3 main classification characteristics, right? The movement precision is 1, environmental stability is 2, movement continuity is 3. This will help you understand things that your coach used to tell you or how you can coach somebody, for sure, okay? Based on movement precision, we have fine versus gross motor skills, right? Well, you know about that. Pretty easy. Environmental stability, open versus closed. Closed, as you can see, you act on the environment. Open, everything is open. So everything can happen. Closed skill, you are in charge of the pace. Open are externally paced. So closed skill are something that you have more control. Open skill, you have to react. We'll see how that works and why. And movement continuity, we're going to talk about discrete, serial, and continuous movement. Okay? All right. Fine and gross. It's not that it's either or, right? So Even in gross movements, we may need some kind of fine motor skills and vice versa. A lot of times we do it on purpose. We combine them because that's life, right? We don't just do one very specific thing, which is either fine or gross motor skill, and that's it. Here, this guy is doing some flies on a physio ball or Swiss ball or exercise ball, however you want to call it, right? There are some gross motor skills that mainly have to do with stability, lower body, and some fine motor skills, right? Which have to do with the movement of the apparatus. So a lot of times we combine on purpose. Open and close. Some skills are more inclined to be closed, some skills are more inclined to be open. However, there are times that we can manipulate that. And that's the beauty of it. In general, as you can see, open skills are supposedly more difficult because they're open, which means more variables to manipulate, less control. Okay? Excuse me. As you can see, in a closed skill environment, the regulatory conditions are relatively stable. In a closed skill environment, or in, what am I trying to write here? And I'm trying to say in an open skill environment, the second one, I'm sorry, the regulatory conditions may be relatively stable or entirely unstable. And I can give you plenty of examples. So running from cone A to B, it's a straight line, it's pretty close to just running. If I'm controlling your pace using a whistle, right, and if I put cones in between that you have to go left and right to make it more open, that I am in control and you don't know when it starts or when it stops. You keep running until I tell you to stop, things like that. I make it harder, okay? And it doesn't mean it's completely unstable. It can be somewhere in between. So in general, if we learn something in a closed environment, it's easier, more controllable. So less variables are changing in that environment. And then when we're ready, we keep adding variables until it's open, right? Functional training in real life, what is it? Is it closed or open environment? Of course it's open, everything can happen, right? And that's why closed kind of training that happens in a lab, we can say that, it's not real life training, it's not functional, okay? Now, for closed skills, emphasis placed on consistency and mastery of performance. For open skills now, emphasis is placed on adaptability and flexibility. How you gonna react and adapt when things in that environment change. The closed one, they're not gonna change. Tell you run from A to B, you run from A to B, right? However, it can be very different if we're talking about open skills, and you have to decide now if you were running on top of squares that they light up and they turn off, that you have to adjust and step only on the ones that they light up. That would be very different. And as you're running, you need to adapt. Otherwise, you lose, if that's kind of a game or a trick. What is discrete? It has a beginning and an endpoint. The example I'll be using from A to B. That serial. So we have a series of discrete movements we just talked about, right? And they have to be done in some kind of order in order to produce the whole movement, the whole skill, right? Playing the piano, classic example. And continuous skill are repetitive skills such as swimming or running, right? So these are one way to classify motor skills. Now, Gentile's two-dimensional classified taxonomy is great, and this is an example about how something, an action, can become more or less stable, more or less difficult. On the left side, we have environmental context, and then as we're moving to the right, you see stable body, quasi-mobile, and then mobile, and beneath that, we also have an object, right? So you can understand that the easiest one is on the left side, upper left side, sitting, static, hamstring, sitting, or static hamstring stretches. And the most difficult example that we can see here is any kind of sports play, right? Because here we have, it's an open skill, so there's motion. So we have, we're moving, right? It's not only that we're moving while we're manipulating an object. Okay, so in this kind of taxonomy, that's the most challenging. Okay, and you can go over all the examples and understand what we're talking about. Classification of motor skills. Let's see the right image. We're catching the ball in baseball. Maybe catching the ball is pretty close because you know what you're doing, right? But at the same time, it will end up being open because you have to look around on what's going on and decide where you're going to throw the ball. On the left side, we'll have another interesting case. This girl is trying to squat, right? But she hasn't secured the weight clearance. So something that was supposed to be closed, now all of a sudden it has become open because she needs to adjust as one of the plates is falling to the right side, and then guess what's going to happen? The whole thing is going to turn to the left. So something that was closed became open. Here, another thing, we have on the left, we are training, in the weight room, and we're trying to jump as high as possible because both girls are volleyball players. So we're trying to, on the left side, it's closed because we're just jumping, right? And we're trying to jump as high as possible. But then on the right side, we take that and we're trying to put it into a game. So you're trying to jump and spike during a game. The left one is closed. The right one is open. Okay? So that's why we said a lot of time we start with the closed environment. We learn how to jump. We're trying to increase how high we can jump, and then take that and transfer it into the game. In the game, everything is possible. Okay? And a lot of times you see the most athletic players in the weight room are not the best players during the game. Okay. All right. This is how you should classify. You have to ask some questions: is the environment open or closed? Is the body in motion stable? Are we manipulating an object or not? When we're trying to facilitate learning, we can simplify the motor skill, and that has to do with coaching, right? Reducing the fine motor component. If it's not necessary in the beginning, reduce the body motion, do it statically. Don't dribble and walk, just dribble. Dribble, that's it, right? Simplify the open environment. So instead of playing with 2 hoops, just use 1. Or instead of 5 players, 3 players, right? Identifying and simplifying regulatory conditions. Let them travel. Let them play for more time. Okay. This is an example that has to do with basketball dribbling, and this is how you can simplify it. Okay, so you make a decision concerning classification, and then you see an example how you can simplify it in order to teach it. Okay, especially when you are training kids, that's common. But this is just an example to show you that everything can be simplified, and we can use that as coaches in order to help people learn motor skills. Okay. All right. So, move my face. All right. So now we're trying to identify the motor skill, but now we need to measure performance. All right, and we need to assess it the best way we can, and we need to compare with something and decide if it's good, bad, how good, how bad, right? Okay, so first we need to measure. How are we going to do it? And second, make sure we're going to go back to things that we talk in statistics, for example, validity and reliability, right? Are you using something that actually measures what you want to measure? And also, is whatever score you're getting back, is it accurate? Okay, that's the validity and reliability that we a lot of times talk about in statistics. Okay. One category of performance measure is the response outcome, and another one is the response reduction. Response outcome has to do with the result. Did you make it or did you not make that free throw? Okay. So if you are up to 80%, then you try to have a goal that is higher than 80%. Okay. Now, response production has to do more about the quality of the movement and the hows and the whys. So we talked about biomechanics, right? And this is why you perform the way you perform has to do with the movement. So it's more kinematics. Remember that. EMG is classic, that has to do with muscle activation, and so this thing you'll see in a little bit. I think there's a figure, if I remember well. And again, quality helps you of the movement, or how the way you move that result in that performance can help you identify and design an intervention to fix whatever you need to fix or to do better. Here we have a push-up, and you see tricep activation, bicep activation through EMG. You see, first of all, that triceps are more activated than biceps. That's what we can see. Triceps are mainly activated during extension, not flexion of the elbow. And you can see that biceps are activated a little later than the triceps, mainly for stability reasons. So that's kind of information that shows us what was activated and how much was activated, and that can help us understand with the whys, how we move, why we move the way we move, right? Another important thing, very common, is we're talking about cognitive aspects. And one cognitive aspect, or the most classic cognitive aspect that we are measuring is through reaction time. Okay. And we'll see a great graphic in a little bit. And one thing you need to remember is that we're talking about the total response time, and then we'll break it down into reaction time. And what we're trying to see here is, let's say you have somebody ready to start running. Okay, so in the beginning we're like ready as a warning signal, and then the stimulus onset, we have a gun or the light turns on. If you've seen like cars racing, like Formula One, or somebody's like go, whatever, it doesn't matter. So from the point that we say go, you see there is a time until there's some kind of neural activation, which is where the EMG onset is, right? So here you're like ready, and here you're like go. And from go to actually having some kind of reaction to our nervous system, there's some time going on here, okay? And this is important. That's one. And from our activation of our nervous system to actually moving, there's some other time here. So this plus this is the reaction time. And this is something that we're interested in because we're trying to teach it and we're trying to reduce it, okay? And then you can see a lot of activation until movement stops. We stop moving, right? But then there's a little bit more activation going on until no activation. So concerning movement displacement, we started moving right here and we stopped moving right here. Okay, maybe a little more here. So that's what happened. What else do I want to say here? Yeah, so the reaction time is the pre-motor time times motor time. That's it. And that's the movement time. Movement time is different concerning us, but the cognitive process we're talking about, what we're interested in is this, from here to here. Now, reaction time and actual movement time is the total reaction time. Right? I think that's very interesting. Yeah, so we kind of covered some of that, but now what we're trying to say is that when we have one stimulus, things are kind of simpler. One stimulus, one response. If you have multiple stimuli and you need multiple responses, things get more complicated. And we cannot process a lot of information, or we can process information up to a point. Okay, so you have to choose how we can explain this with the multiple stimuli. So there are the choice reaction time paradigms. So we have two or more stimuli, and each stimulus has a different response. We also have the discrimination paradigm. We'll have multiple stimuli, but only one is relevant. So we need to focus more on that one relevant stimulus, because we need that for that one relevant response that we need, okay? The bottom line is that the more stimuli we have, the more choices we have as a response, the slower the reaction time. Okay, that's why a lot of times, if you watch the 100-meter dash, you're like, shh, silence, be quiet. So the sprinter can focus on one thing, the gun. Okay. Laboratory RT tests do not seem to translate well outside the laboratory, of course, no, because in the laboratory, you can control for a lot of variables, which is great because you can see if one thing changed because of whatever variable you manipulated, but that's not what happens in the outside world. Okay. The American Association of Retired Persons. We're going to talk about that test in a little bit. I think that would be fun. This is a reactive agility, so we'll have the coach and the athlete. So you see some timing lights that they start measuring the reaction time. So the coach gives a signal, gives some kind of movement, and once the coach moves, it means that the athlete needs to move as well. So the athlete will just do one step forward and then choose to go left and right, right? Trying to react based on whatever the coach does. So that shows the reaction time. That's a lot of times we do that, for example, in basketball, and they call it like the shadow drill. So whatever one that person does, the other person has to follow. And it's like one is defending, the other one is one is defense, the other one is offense. So coach is the one who is leading this, by moving first, and then the athlete has to react very fast and follow that shadow, that movement, okay? And of course, all these lights measure the reaction time, which we're trying to decrease. All right, so so here, this is something that you can do on by yourselves, right? There are 14 spots that you can focus on, and you can take a timer, put it at 10 seconds, right? Number one is up there on the left side. So you can start and then start the clock from 10 to 0, right? Count down. And then once it goes off, you stop. And you stop at the number that you find. So you go from 1 to 2, and then try to find 3, and so on and so forth. If you find 1 to 10, you are below average. If you find it 11 to 13, you are average. And if you find 14, you're above average. Okay, based on your age, because I'm assuming you're around 21, 22, because it depends on the age as well. So I'm giving you those numbers so you can play with that. Again, 10 seconds, start from 1, and when the clock goes off, stop. 10 or below, you're below average. 11 to 13, you're average. If you find 14, you're above average, based on your age. Right, visual inclusion. Less information, or as you'll see what I mean. So here we have a person, first of all, like playing tennis on the left side, right? And we can give less and less information. On the right side, it's not about a sequence of movements, but we're starting taking pieces of that image off. So again, we're giving less information. The experienced person can predict the movement easier or with less information. That's what we're trying to say here. Except for measuring performance, another thing to do, we can do is measure error, right? So there are several different types of error measures. You'll see temporal and spatial accuracy. So today we're going to talk about C, constant error, A, absolute error, and variable error. And I'm going to go straight to the example and explain it there, because they're very similar. I'm going to read the definitions and then move to the example. Constant error is the average error over a given number of trials. Absolute error is the average over a given number of trials of the error absolute values, the absolute values. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. And variable error is the standard deviation of the group of error scores. So here we have, let's say we're playing darts, right? We have the Sophia on the left, Olivia on the right, okay? So Sophia, if we take all this, we're talking about 7 tries, right? If we take the numbers from all of this, the absolute numbers, right, and we put them all together, we get an average of score 0. Okay, and then if we average the absolute values of the scores without identifying if they're minuses or pluses, we get a number, an average score of 2.3. And then the standard deviation that has to do with how dispersed they are, we get a 2.9 from both sides. Okay. Now Olivia on the right side, if we count everything, the average of the scores, we get a -2. And -2 here, we're counting if they're left or right. It shows that they are 2 units off, but here we get the direction as well. So 2 units to the left. So she's off by 2 on average, and more specifically 2 on the left. Okay, which makes sense if you really pay attention. The AE is the same as Sophia's, 2.3. If you take the plus and the minuses out, and the deviation, the dispersion is 1.8. So here we get a lot of information, and if you had to choose out of these 2 shooters, right, which one would you use? Who would you choose? remember the A is the same. Okay? I would choose the right sugar. I think we named her Olivia. Why? Because you see that less dispersion and most of your shots are on the left. So if we fix probably one thing or one or two things, we can just take that and move it to bullseye. The other thing is all over the place. There are a lot of things that we may need to fix. Okay, so this is again about errors and what do they mean. Okay, right here we are using video. Okay, to identify errors, and identifying errors is very efficient. So on the left side, we can compare ourselves to this, which is a video of ourselves, like throwing the javelin. And we can have two different videos of two tries, or we can compare the video to what we thought we did, right? And that's very important, especially in a world of smartphones, right? At taking a video of a movement you're doing, like snatch, and then actually comparing what you thought you did with what you actually did is very beneficial. On the right picture, we put two videos together, but these are different gymnasts, and we can compare and contrast. Okay, so on the left side is the same person, on the right side are different people. Individual differences. This is very important, of course. Humans are very different. Now, unlike motor skill classification, abilities, so motor skill is different than an ability, right? Abilities fall into three broad categories: physical proficiency, psychological, and psychomotor. Physical. Let's start with that. We have physiological and or anatomical characteristics. Okay, muscle strength, maximal oxygen uptake, things like that. And some of them, especially the static abilities, are mainly genetic. Okay, so we can't really change your height. We can't really change the positioning of your ligaments or your lung size. Okay, so some things are kind of predetermined. Psychological, very difficult, like mental toughness, I've been researching mental toughness, difficult to measure, and the psychological bits are different, well, not difficult, but it's challenging to compare to physical abilities, okay? But they can be compared. In psychomotor, you see these ladies making something out of clay. So here you have physical proficiency abilities that require some kind of cognitive processing. Okay? Dexterity capabilities are a classic example. Some are genetic qualities. Some can be learned. Some can be trained. Okay? So most of the research is on psychological characteristics, physiological characteristics. The psychological and psychomotor abilities are way less researched and way less understood. Okay. Persons may combine divergent abilities to produce high-level motor skills in ways others do not. Again, individual differences. And what we call the natural athlete is like, have you ever heard of the term all-around athlete? Like, it would be good in whatever sport they would choose because they're so athletic, so good at everything. Now, if we can determine the abilities, then we can practice them. Okay, and that is very important, and that's why we're trying to do that thing called talent identification. But that's not easy. So again, we need to determine, first of all, the abilities that are necessary for a specific sport. And then if we do that, we need to, we can train it, or we can identify talent pretty early. This is problematic. Let me give you an example. So we know that if you are a volleyball hitter, jumping high is very important, and being tall is very important. So high level volleyball hitters are tall and they can jump really high. However, being tall and jumping high doesn't make you a very good volleyball hitter. Okay. Okay, so that was pretty much the example I gave you. Yeah, we say that we are able to identify talent, but there's so much talent that we do not identify. For example, Tom Brady, draft misted. Giannis Antetokounmpo. Nobody thought he would be who he was. He wasn't really well known in Greece. Nobody really appreciated him. Okay, so there are things that we think we know, but we're missing a lot. And since I talked about the drafting, right, the NHL draft does tests like this, or even you know that for NHL they're doing a test on a bike. Or bike. We are moving on ice, right? So how is this relevant? How is this useful? So again, we're going back to the validity of the test. Is whatever test I'm using measuring whatever I think it measures? And then even if it does measure, is it important for that sport or not? Maybe it isn't. Maybe I thought it was. Okay, think about NFL. Are all these tests relevant? Debatable. Okay, 1 out of 4. I'm gonna stop sharing this. And I'm gonna go to chapter 7. Let me see. Chapter 7. Excellent. Share my screen. Boom. All right, here we go. Learning and the development of expertise. Another great chapter. All right, I'll talk about some models. It'll be fun. Learning, what is learning? Is defined as a relatively permanent change in one's capability to perform as a result of practice. Right? Excuse me. So if you see some change in performance, change of performance is a result of practice, then we can say that person learned that. Right? Now, learning can be operationally defined such as persistent improvement over time, better consistency, stability of performance in the face of disruptions, better adaptability when the conditions change, right? So these are the 4 things we need to assess in order to infer that something has been learned. One way to do it is through retention tests and transfer tests. Okay, so retention tests are given after a period of no practice to determine if performance is still elevated and consistent. In the interval, so how much time, how long is that period, is called retention interval. That's important. right? 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. Transfer test now. So here we assess motor skill performance in a context different from the practice setting. Can you transfer this from the weight room to the court, on the ice, to the field? All right. So we have open and closed. Of course, a lot of things may play a role here. Let me give you an example. So we have 4 scenarios, right? So let's talk about all the way up there, the orange one, 8. So in the beginning, let's say the number at the bottom of the x-axis are weeks. So we start training something week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we can see the performance is going up. So from poor we went to good. And then we stop for whatever reason, right? COVID, injury, not injury, yeah, injury, and on something irrelevant, let's say. For whatever reason, we stop, okay? And then we'll have 3 people, A, B, and C. So A, when we start, okay? And that 7 to 8 can be anything, can be 1 week, 1 month, 1 day, whatever, right? So A, we can see that A, when we start practicing again, he or she starts from the same level and goes up. B, we see a huge drop, but it goes up. C, we see that huge drop, but it's still going down. And we need to be very careful in trying to interpret this course, right? At the bottom, what we see is another scenario. And you see those lines that go that are going above and below that circle. So the circle is the point that we see up top, but the other lines show the variability, the dispersion. So you see that as we train from 1 to 7, the scores are getting closer and closer to that point, which is great. Once we stop training and we resume training, you see again the dispersion is high. Okay, those are retention tests. Formal and informal tests usually about coaching mostly informal. What is a plateau? Plateau is when we have no improvement or we're getting just a little bit of improvement. And they can be happening for many, many reasons. They can be, what are the factors I was looking for? Learner-based, so based on the learner, based on the coach, the instructor, and based on the task. Okay? Learner-based factors. As you can see, psychological factors, physiological and psychophysiological factors, right? Instructor-based, maybe, if we're talking about the learner, right? If you have an injury, of course, you may plateau, right? If you change the coach changes for whatever reasons, right? You may plateau again. Maybe it's, the difference was a coach. The task-based factor is that maybe you learn the task, right? And you need some kind of variation. You're not getting that variation, the new technique, so you plateau, right? Different plateaus here. You see plateau in the beginning, and then at the end, and then a plateau in the middle. So again, we can interpret them in a way that maybe in the very beginning, you weren't taught the right way, and then they changed how they taught you, and then boom. And then at the end, though, you see that learning fatigue, so-called learning fatigue, we get fatigue with learning the same thing, no motivation. On the other case, you started really good, and then something happened in the middle, which could be the coach changed, and then there was another coach change, and then we can see you went up. Who knows? Okay, so it needs really, we need to proceed with caution when we are trying to interpret this. Transfer is very important, right? And a lot of times when we talk about transfer, we talk about positive transfer, but I want to make sure you understand that there's negative transfer as well. So I can take you in the weight room and make you extremely strong in squatting, but that will make you lose power when you're playing soccer. So that's a negative transfer. So, or making you bigger, which makes you slower on the court. So there are things what we need to do is do create design practice that equates to positive transfer. You know what is, for example, I always ask that. You know what has the highest similarity to basketball or any sport? The action sport. So our goal is to try to create conditions that are very, very similar to whatever we're going to transfer this skill. Remember that, okay? There's similarity, yes, okay. Okay. Positive transfer enables the progression from simple to complex, such as close skill to open skill. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's see this guy here. This guy was shooting with both hands, which is not good. And then slowly he learned how to just mainly use one arm and the other for stabilization. You see he's using his right hand to shoot, right? But then when they said, okay, take that and go overhead, he messed it up again. So we had a negative transfer when he went overhead. All right, here we've talked about it before. We're just repeating ourselves. We have a cross transfer, right? Working on one link, it will transfer some kind of benefits to the other. That's called bilateral transfer. Okay, and it happens whether we like it or not. And that's a good thing in general, right? Rehabilitation, of course, is really important. We have covered all this. Now, let's see about this guy again. So he's trying to do a layup. He's right-handed, as we saw, and he's trying to use now his left hand. By trying to use his left hand, he forgot to switch legs, so he's using his left leg on the left side. And then on the right side, yes, he did use his right leg for that penultimate step, but he forgot to use his right arm as stabilization. How can we maximize transfer? Through specificity. Okay, everything, sensory, environmental information, anything that we can control and make it specific, we should try to do that. Okay. Either here, this is simulation, which will that transfer to reality? Well, it depends. If it's close to reality, as close as possible, some of it will transfer. Okay, and there's a lot happening with virtual reality and football, for example, right? The quarterbacks, they're just running the plays through virtual reality, and of course it's not exactly the same, but they're not getting hit either, so they're trying to create everything else to look as similar as possible so they can practice more without getting the side effects of actually running the plays, which is getting hit a lot. Stages, all right, we'll have the old model of Fitz and Posner, and then we'll have Zendilla's two-stage model. So the first one emphasizes, as you can see, a description of performance from stage to stage, and the second one on the learning process and instruction occurring during the stages. This is an example. On the left side, we'll have that classic cognitive, then to associative, and then to autonomic states. The goal is to move to the autonomic states, that everything happens automatically and you don't really have to think about it. It's boom, you have the skill and you just perform, right? And on Gentiles, which is newer, you see that we were learning in the beginning the rules, and then we are performing whatever skill we just learn in different environments, and we learn how to do it when the circumstances are different. We learn how to adjust. Okay? Look at it. This is really important. We have the old model, and then we have the new model, but they're kind of similar. This is an example that has to do with dribbling, right? How you start in the very beginning, how to grip the ball, the cognitive states, and then at the very end, the autonomous states, the ability to throw in different contexts with effectiveness, sidearm, while in motion, etc., etc. Okay. We need to know where our trainees are. If we know where they are in which stage, then we can help them accordingly. Okay. Here we have an example of a surgeon. So this woman, what we can see is that the more skilled surgeons are, the less they move their eyes, because they know where they're looking at, and they do less movements. So they're more controlled movements with their eyes, and less movements with the joystick. Okay. This is kind of, I'll just read it, that's nice. Use information, so the experts compared to novices use information in different ways, are able to detect more relevant information from the environment. Think about your favorite skilled quarterback compared to the next one. Can faster and more effectively store and access info, can better recognize patterns of play, can use circumstances and situations to predict or anticipate future actions, overall make decisions that are more rapid and more appropriate. Okay. All right. Also, we'll have examples like expert boxers. You see, emphasize defensive moves over attacks. And these Highlanders, it's not just throwing. There's a skill and there's a way. So there's a quality of movement that you see that the expert. So the expert are focusing on maybe different things. Okay. Course coordination is something that's happening. We talked about it. It's intermuscular between muscles, intermuscular between the same muscle. Okay, part of the learning process is limiting unnecessary movements and muscle actions. And we talked about that already. Here, if I remember very well, is ball rowers. Yes, so after 10 practices, you can see the difference between activation. They're doing the same work, but with less activation. So they are expending less energy to produce the same amount of work. Same here. You see how a novice player is very close to the other. You see the two girls, they're very close. On the B scenario, the expert is further away, because that gives him the better information on, he knows what to do and he will perform better. Okay, so he understands that just being close to the opponent is not what makes him perform better. Assessments, of course, are very, very important to know where they are and how we can help them. Kind of style of information of learning they like. What is learned, what is not learned. All right, that was the end of the second one. I'm gonna stop sharing and we're gonna move to the third one. I think we're doing great. Hang in there. I know there's a lot of information. So chapter 8, information processing and motor skill performance. Okay. So we talked about that. CNS processes information. And information comes from the internal environment and the external environment. Okay. Information now is stored in the form of memories, plans, and processes. Information is identified, interpreted, filtered, and acted upon by the C and S. Okay? So we cannot process all the information. There are different theories about how much information that we can use. And our capacities, as you can see, are limited but flexible, and that's very important. Okay? Another keyword here is interference. Whether we have small or large interference, that's important, which help us with the information processing and the decision we're going to make. So the more interference we have, the less the lower level performance we're going to have. Okay, so this is the multiple resource theory. We have the sensory input, which is different than types of processing and responses, and all three of them, those sensory modalities that you see, types of processing and responses, are going through the states of processing that is at the top. So we have perception, cognition, responding, and the main idea is that different resource, different processing. So the manual response will be processed differently than a vocal response. Okay, that's what I want you to remember from here. Here you see the bottleneck. So if we can, we have information coming from the outside to inside that we can process, right? So if we have too much information, you see there's a lot of waiting over there because it's a bottleneck theory. So this gets stuck, right? That's why we say that we cannot process too much info, okay? So the quantity is the thing. That's why we don't use our cell phones in driving, because it is based on that theory. We can do, we cannot be very high quality drivers while we're doing many things at the same time, right? It's like, have you ever tried to find somebody's house and you tell everybody in the car to shut up or you turn down the music? It doesn't sound like relevant when you're just looking around, but it's too much information and you can't process it. And you just want to lower the quantity so you can just perform better, okay? Memory, all right. So memory, of course, is important, right? And important to store, recall, and we're going to break it down into the working or short term, of course, that we know, in the long term. But motor memory that has to do with some kind of motor skills. We also have non-motor memory that helps with skills. And this is an example is remembering patterns of play. Right? Excuse me. Short term is the temporary use. Long term we usually is the permanent repository of information. Okay. Long-term memory is more about procedural, declarative, semantic, and episodic information. Let's talk about some strategies for improving that. Movement characteristics, we'll talk about these remembering strategies, and practice characteristics. All right, movement. So if it's a continuous rhythmic skill, that's easier to remember, right? Remembering strategies. Of course, we'll have some strategies that stand out. Repetition. Okay, keep doing what you're doing. Of course, helps with memory. Meaningfulness and understanding why you're doing what you're doing. That helps you understand. Self-control over how and what movements you need to practice. And intention. We're going to talk about intention today. And you know, I sound my emails with lift intentionally, or habitually, or even my videos. That's the last thing I said. Intention is important. We'll see why. What is learned during practice is what is going to be remembered, and what is going to be remembered will affect performance. So again, we're going to go back to specificity. and try to practice in a way that is very similar to real life or real game conditions. Okay, so here we need to talk about the challenge point hypothesis. And the challenge point hypothesis says that when you're trying to learn something, when you're trying to practice, it should be challenging, but not too challenging. All right, let's see how this happens over here. So in the beginning, we're going to talk about two things, performance and learning. Okay, and those two things in terms of difficulty. Performance on one side, learning on the other side, and then we have difficulty rate. You see that when something is not very difficult, right, the performance is high, but the learning is low, right? Let's go to the other side. When something is very difficult, the performance is low and the learning is low. What we're trying to do here is find that point where performance is high, but learning is also high. Because this is practice, you need to learn something, right? So you see that it needs to be somewhere in the middle-ish. So where it is challenging, but not too challenging. Because the low is not real. So you perform very well because it's very easy, but that's not going to happen in real life, right? Also, you need to learn something. So you're trying to combine learning and performance and find that sweet point over there, which is somewhere in the middle, and it has to do with, yes, challenging in terms of difficult level, but not too much, okay? That's a challenge point hypothesis. Remember it when you're trying to coach somebody. Attention. Oh man, that's important too. And if also intention plays an important role with attention as well, we're gonna see that. Now, to avoid taxing resources, we must limit the amount of information. Attention regulation is very important, right? And if you are one of our student athletes in this class, you know I talked about that to our student athletes like 3 weeks ago. Okay, attention regulation is very, very important. So what we're trying to do here is pay more attention to the things that matter and block the things that do not matter. Okay, it's very mental. It's something that we can learn. And you can see we can place our attention to something external or something internal. Which one is better? Let's see. But we can select. We can select the space and we can select the time. Okay. Focus of attention refers to the quality of concentration on a stimuli or ongoing situation. This is something that may need to switch really fast. And elite level athletes do that more easily than novices. Okay? So what do we have here? We have surgical nurses. And here we have delivery. And you see that on the left side, we have frequency of attentional switches. And at the bottom, the x-axis, we have the stages. And the more critical stages are stage 1 and stage 2, obviously. And you can see that the experienced nurses have less switches than the novice ones. Okay, that's one way to distinguish them. The second bullet point is funny. If you want to watch that video, that's great. It's the gorilla playing in basketball. You can, if you don't know that experiment, do it. It's a video and you have to count something and we're going to tell you. That goes to tell you that if you focus too much on one thing, you may lose what's important. So that's something classic that has been used by magicians, right? For centuries now, and it's part of deception, right? You pay attention to one thing while something else is just changing, right? So paying too much attention to something may be negative. All right, so 91st two-dimensional scale. very well known. It has to do with narrow and broad focus over external and internal, right? Well, the view and the width. So it really depends. There's no better or worse. You see there are 4 combinations, and it really depends on what you need to do and the timing. Where to place attention. Usually we say that it's better to place attention on externally. So when you're jumping right here in this example, don't focus on exactly the movement and then you have to bend the knees and then extend the knees and then no. Maybe you should be like, okay, I want to reach that all the way out there and just focus there and then just jump. A lot of times in movements like that, it's more beneficial to focus on something external. Okay. High level athletes, as you see here, it's fine. I don't want to recognize too much information. The demands of attention change over learning stages. That's important. As task becomes automatic, the need to place attention on actual movement execution is reduced. So with automaticity, the learner is free to place attention on other cues. With improvement, the learner is important versus irrelevant information. All right, so we said that we cannot process a ton of information. So we need to pay attention to whatever is relevant. So think about the first time when you learn how to dribble, right? In the beginning, you would look down, see your hands, and see where the ball is, and try to find some kind of synchronization. As this became automatic, now you're dribbling and you're looking straight. So when you play, now you're not only static, you can run and dribble, and also look around, see where your teammates are, where your opponents are, and make a decision. Same when you're learning how to skate. Very difficult in the beginning, you're looking down, and then you're becoming more of an expert. So now you can skate, and guess what? You not only can skate, you can play hockey while skating. And looking straight up, so you can see what's going on with your teammates again, with your opponents, and make up your mind, okay? Okay, nothing really crazy here. Quiet eye is the thing that, if you're interested in that, is something that came up and has to do pretty much with the experts, no matter what's going on, right? Haphazardly, less haphazardly. They place attention where it matters, no matter what else is going on. So here we have a very expert goalie in hockey, just doing what we call quiet eye. So the eye is focusing there and it's not switching. Here's a head focus. Okay. Attention can be learned. So emphasize movement initiation. That's important. Prioritize movement components and focus on external cues. Right. So if you're focusing on how a movement initiates, maybe you can predict what's going to happen next, right? Specific components and external cues. Here we have an example of external cue. You see on the left that he's trying to throw the ball, like he's not extending his arm. He's moving his body closer to the ball instead of moving the ball away. So he's like this. So now here he has he's whipping right here. And by doing this exercise and having some external cue, right, or how to do it on the pole, he will learn how to extend his arm, and then you can take him back and use him the ball, baseball, and try to do it the correct way. Practice fosters anticipation and simplification. Both lead to faster and more accurate information processing. Prediction is the key here, right? Anticipation enables prediction. And you know what to expect, and that's great. And that's what experts do. Of course, you challenge information differently. 4 particular practice strategies promote the learning of information processing and attentional skills. 1. Create situations that specifically challenge information processing resources, including chaotic, emotional, and fast-paced environments. 2. Maintain alertness and attentiveness. 3. Again, we'll have to talk about attention again. So adopt a sensory set rather than a motor set. So what that means, that needs a little bit of explanation, is try to focus on reacting fast rather than thinking how you should react when something happens, and think about the specific motor skill. Think about reacting fast. That's the key here. And use mental practice. We'll talk about that in a second. Stress, arousal, and anxiety, all three of them can affect information processing. We'll talk about this in exercise and sports psychology course in the fall, right? You know, you can become under aroused or also over aroused. None of them is good thing. So you have to find that optimal level. Now we've talked about this theory. That's one theory. The inverted U, you find that sweet spot up there where you're not over aroused or under aroused, is find a spot where you can perform the highest. Of course, that's a null theory. Then we have the individual zone of optimal functioning that says it's not a point and it's very individualized. Not everybody has the same, and it's a range, right? I don't want to go over this. We've covered them already anyway. Choking. Choking is when the extreme arousal or anxiety is that much, that reduces attention that much, that we can't perform. We can't perform something that we know how to do it, right? So in those extreme cases, we say we choked. And it could be an interesting topic if you want to talk about that. There's a lot of research lately on choking, right? Okay. Relaxation techniques may be very important. Being intentional. Okay. Attention skills must be combined with intention and effort. Intention provides a basis for focus of attention and attention switching. Intention drives attention. So this is why we can learn that. You can learn to be intentional, where you can focus on when not to focus, when you should pay more attention, and when you should pay less attention. So it's a psychological process. Okay, intention. So what do we have here? So we can see how intention can affect performance. So we are doing some kind of movement. And first we have maximal effort, and you can see the torque, how much force, rotational force we can produce, right? And then we have an intentional sub-maximum effort, so you can see again. And then we tell the participant, they told the participant to fake an injury and fake maximal effort. And you can see how it is different. And this curve, as you see here, reveals a different contraction intent. So we can contract based on intention. We can perform based on our intention. So our intention affects our performance. That's why I'm always telling you, be intentional, be intentional. When you're watching this video, be intentional, right? Be intentional and get as much information as possible. All right, that's the third one. I'm going to stop sharing and stop sharing. Okay. And let's go for the last one. All right, chapter 9. Share and let's go. Okay. Practice and instruction. Let's talk about practice and instruction for a little bit. And there are some theories. I'm not going to go over all of them, but most of them. So For us here, practice and training is a little bit different than we use it. We're used to use it. So here, practice will be something that has to do with mental performance and training with physiological function. Okay, just for here at least. All right, so that's some part then we're going to talk about. Let's talk about the systems theory and constraints-led approaches. Again, you'll see that this is very important information, especially if you coach or you are in athletic training or you are going towards physiotherapy or any kind of that kind of field, right? So the system theory says that movement has to do with three things: the interaction of three things, actually: the individual, the task, and the environmental factors. We've covered that before, right? So our perception interprets the constraints that we see, determines ways to take them into account, and then we plan and we execute. Affordances is a term that we use a lot in modern learning. For example, you see a wall that is 4 meters high, and just by identifying that, we're trying to find ways to go and jump above it, right? That is when we say affordances. All right, so the learning that we are talking about tonight is about overcoming constraints, detecting and understanding the affordances, and coupling that perception with action. So in a constraint-led approach, and that's important, constraints are presented to have the learner discover affordances, but further lead the learner to discover solutions to those movement problems. That's not very important. But when you find those affordances and you're trying to put them into practice, it is important to put them in some kind of game settings. And also, do not break it down that much that takes away the whole picture, right? So here we have an example. Different constraints, different movement. So you see the guy, how he, that's when it's live, and how he's doing it when he's, a machine is feeding him, okay? Why is this happening? Most likely because if I would throw the ball, he would see me and he would get a lot of information helping him with anticipation and prediction. With a machine, he cannot do that. By doing that all the time, though, or most of the time during practice using a machine, what's happening here? Different constraints, different kind of movement that I'm learning. Is that the right thing to do? Right, so think about that. So when you're trying to break down the movement or trying to design some practice, the constraints, the characteristics of the environment here change. So the person is the same, but the situation is different. So the interaction produces a different result, which is not optimal, okay? Discovered learning is important, of course. Okay, deliberate practice. Have you ever heard about that? We say that in order to become an expert, right, we need 10,000 hours of deliberate, aka intentional practice. It has to be deliberate, okay? High levels of motivation and effort, activities based on knowledge and characteristics of the performer, immediate and continual feedback, abundant repetition, intent to improve, okay? Of course, experts spend more time in deliberate practice. Okay, 5 fundamental features of practice. 1, specific intention to improve and master the skill. Strong motivation and effort, individual-based practice, and learner input into the practice. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Effective communication, information, and overlearning with variation. Okay? This is how you can, these are the features that you should use. Of course, they're different from novice to expert, and we'll see how they can be different when we talk about the microstructure versus the macrostructure of practice. Okay. We need goals for its small specific test, drill, activity, but also we need long-term goals concerning the macrostructure of practice, okay? Which I think makes sense. Okay. We need to organize practice with precise goals and objectives, individual goals, and team goals, right? As you can see, effective practices are short, intense, and organized. Look at these guys. We see 8 guys at least there, right? And in this case, the coach is just throwing balls and they have to react, okay? Who is even paying attention? Most of them don't even look towards the coach. They're talking with each other, just walking around. Nothing looks organized or intense. So this cannot be considered an effective practice, okay? High effort, always ask for high effort, demand high effort from your athletes. Intentful and effortful. Practice should be based on the individual or team prior knowledge. So let's say we have this guy who's shooting the ball, the big guy with a white shirt. We need to know the specifics. We need to know the physiological and psychological specific of this guy. What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? And how we can make him better. Okay, so again, it has to be individualized. Autonomy. It has been proven that people who have some kind of control over whatever environment, practice environment, they will most likely perform better. For example, you are about, that's kind of relevant, irrelevant, but you are about to choose your own subject for your PDO. Okay, well, I know already that you will have higher motivation by doing that. Higher motivation means you put more effort. More effort means higher performance. Okay, it's kind of similar, right? You kind of give a little bit or more power to the actual trainee or athlete to participate in the design of the practice. That will definitely give something positive back. Communication. Communication is important with everything, right? You can see effective communication fosters trust, encourages, motivates, and transmits knowledge and information, clarifies intention, motivates for effort, and creates an environment for learner-based practice and control. We have 2 kinds of communication, pre-movement and post-movement. So I can tell you, okay, this is how you're going to grab the bar, and this is how you're going to move the bar from here to there. Or I can tell you, when you fell into the pool, this is how you did it, and I'll give you some feedback after you have done it, okay? Verbal, written information, it really depends. The main point is here to communicate what you need to communicate. Of course, it always depends on the person who sends information and the person who receives the information as well. Also in how you're going to code the message and how they're going to decode the message. I hope you remember all that from sports psych. 5 basic concepts for giving instructions. Convey goals appropriate to the learning situation. Lead the learner to learn on their own based on individual characteristics. Instruct within the cognitive and physical capability of the learner. Encourage exploration and discovery of movement situation. take into account that distractions will influence the learner's focus of attention, okay, especially if it's during a game. Now, we give feedback, okay? And it's called augmented feedback because when the coach or somebody else is giving information to the athlete, the trainee, the information that he or she receives is more rich than whatever he or she is feeling or whatever they did, okay? So that's why it's called augmented feedback. Now, there's a thing which is very popular lately, has been very popular, which is called biofeedback. They can get some feedback, such as this guy, this swimmer, right? Which they could get that feedback from a coach, but now it's either different information or the same information that they're getting from a machine. Okay. And what kind of information can be knowledge of results or knowledge of performance? So you did it or you didn't do it, you made it or you didn't make it, or talk about the quality of whatever you did. Okay. Here, in the first picture, this trainer is telling the trainee what to do. So it's descriptive, it's before. Sorry, prescriptive, because it's before. In the second one, it's after he does what he does, but also you see that she's holding the bag, which affects the constraints, so it makes it easier for him to do it. Here, these rowers getting a lot of information, right? Biofeedback. Frequency. It really depends, but yes, more is better than less up to a point though. You don't need to give too much feedback. Also, you want them to be less and less dependent on your feedback. You want them to be to do whatever adjustments they need to do by themselves if possible. Yeah, overlearning. Okay, why is it called overlearning? Because you already know the skill, but you keep doing it. Why would you keep doing it? Because it is, as you can see, overlearning may modify brain structures. You're trying to make something permanent. Okay, to be more resistant to forgetting and enhance adaptability. So overlearning, yes, we keep doing the same thing, but variations, right? So we're trying now to make it permanent and make us more adjustable to more similar or similar-ish situation that we will need to use that skill. Mass practice versus distributed practice. Another cool thing I want you to pay attention to, that's important. If you have ever been coached or you ever want to coach, this is important. Mass practice is longer, right? Distributed practice is spread out. So you can have 3 practices per day that are shorter with more longer periods of time. Which one is better? It depends. It depends. Maybe you should start with distributed and learn one thing, right? If you are a decathlete, you have distributed practice. But also, you need to combine things that you're learning during those intervals. You start with distributed and then you have a mass practice and you put everything together. Okay. What else we have here? Oh, this is a nice quote to remember. Repetition without repeating. Okay, so when we're learning again, yes, we're doing the same thing, but it's not exactly the same. Okay. Blocked versus random. I want you to know that too. Blocked is what? One thing we're practicing only. And then we move to the next one, and then we'll move to the next one. This is something that we usually do when we learn something new. Random is, if I have learned 5 skills, it can be anything out of those 5. Okay, so blocked is great, random is great. Again, it depends on how you use them. Again, if you have ever been coached, think about things you have done in the past, and you can categorize them based on this, but also think about you coaching tomorrow, okay, and how you can use these. Contextual interference. Okay, so here we have practice variability going from low to high, and contextual interference from low to high. So again, 2 things that we can combine. We have 4 kind of different combinations. So practice variability would be just getting fed from a basket all the way to game, actual game, right? And contextual interference could be just simple hitting the just one combination, and then the interference could be all kinds of combinations of inside out, cross court, and down the line forehands. Okay, so again, when you're coaching, you can design your practice based on practice variability and contextual interference. Mental practice, which I think is kind of one of the last things, if not the last one for this chapter. We've talked about this in sports psychology. I'm not gonna talk a lot about that. Observational learning is a thing, right? It's also called modeling. We see somebody and we are trying to imitate them, right? Of course, it depends on the skill of the other person. If it's too skilled and we're not, that's not going to work very well. It really depends. But seeing somebody is working. Let's talk about the neuroscience of this. That's cool. So, so here, what we have is, I'll show you. We're talking about mirror neurons. Okay, so these are the ones that hypothetically are getting activated when we're watching something through modeling. So we have the action of reaching to grab something. The first part of the images are when you're actually doing it. The second one is when you are watching it, somebody else doing it. And the third one is by thinking that you're doing it. So these overlapping areas supposedly are the mirror neurons that we are activating, and we're practicing with just watching something or by thinking of doing it. We talked about imagery, right? Which is this. And imagery can help us learn a skill, or not only learn a skill, but try to perform a certain way. We've talked about this. I'm not going to go over these again. Talked about imagery in sports psych. This is kind of cool. So we have high-level jumpers and low-level jumpers, and both of them are doing some imagery that has to do with jumping, and they're activating different brain areas, which kind of tell us that as you're getting more and more expert, you are activating actually different areas of your brain. So even then, when you're trying to do imagery, you would activate different areas of your brain if you're comparing high level to low level athletes. Okay, kind of pretty impressive. That's a summary between imagery and observation. Okay, that was it, guys. We did it. We did it. All right, so again, tomorrow office hours from 8 to 12:30, and submit a low 17 to 20 by Sunday midnight. I hope to see you tomorrow. If not, guess what? Lift intentionally, not habitually.